Welcome to a guide for force construction for Hammer Slammers the Crucible, the tabletop miniatures wargame. The first thing you'll want to do to construct your force is go to the Hammer Slammers website and click on PDF downloads. Once you click on PDF downloads, you'll be brought to the page you can see here on the right side of the screen. You'll want to hover your cursor over big detachment cards. A drop-down menu will appear and you'll want to be using detachment cards from the 15mm ranges, so A to K and L to Z. We're using the 15mm ranges as they're considered the optimum cards for the game now that it's been revised from the Hammer Slammers the Digital Crucible edition. And that's for both the 6mm and 15mm model ranges. As a side note, the most amount of forces available are within the 15mm options here on the menu. So I'm going to start with a simple force construction, and we're going to go to 15mm L to Z and then go all the way down to Slammer's Main. Now Slammer's Main is a complete one-page force sheet for the Hammer Slammers during the key period in the timeline for the Hammer Slammers, as told in the various books and stories. The first thing I would do once the sheet is loaded is I go straight to the detachment section, as you can see here. Now the detachment section acts as a type of guardrails for the whole construction of your force. The first thing it's going to say is that each detachment, which is the minimum size of a force that you field in the game, the Crucible, is going to be 8 TUs, meaning tactical units. Now a tactical unit is either a base of infantry or a skimmer, or any one vehicle or flyer. So there'll be a combination of 8 of any of those that make one detachment, which again is your minimum size force. So using the detachment section to begin with, you have pre-made detachments by name. Now these are lore-specific detachments so that you can keep exactly in keeping with the force construction as intended to go along with the story and background. It also acts secondary as a type of guardrail if, for instance, you're trying to carry out a tournament or you're just newer to the game and you want to make sure that you're not making unbalanced detachments. Now, force construction all works with adding up points for a grand total. It doesn't really relate to how many detachments you take. That falls into play later on. So, we'll start by talking about the pre-made detachments, and I always use them as a starting point. And then if I do feel like I want to modify them, I tend to pick a detachment I like the look of and then just adjust certain tactical units within it to bring in the flavour I was actually looking for, and I'll show that a bit later. So the way this flows is as follows. We know we're picking 8 tactical units, and to create one detachment we can just pick from any of the examples below here. So you could pick from a single armoured detachment all the way down as an ore to White Mice command detachment. So in this example I'm going to pick a single tank detachment, as it's a very simple detachment. It's consisting of 1 blower command tank and 7 blower tanks, and it comes to 4,000 points. So there is my detachment chosen. Now, depending on which detachment I choose, I can then look to add a lieutenant to any of the detachments at 40 points. Now, I do this at the end to follow the flow of what you're constructing. So I'm picking one of the pre-made detachments and then I'm adding a lieutenant. Now the lieutenant will get assigned to the command that's highlighted in the detachment that you've chosen. So in the case of the single tank detachment, you'll see that there's 1 blower command tank, and that's where the lieutenant would be assigned to. So how do we now use the rest of the sheet? First, we see blower tanks. So we go over to the left hand side on the top here, and we can see there's 4 panels of various units. And then we see blower tanks here. And we see M2A1-4, which is just referencing the models of tanks that can represent your blower tank, and they'll have all the same rules. Then looking at the profile, you'll see that blue text describes variants. So we'll have 7 blower tanks as per all of the stats here, and then we'll have an 8th command blower tank. And what is the difference of a blower tank on this stat card? It says same stats, meaning there are no changes or alterations to any of the rules on this section. So the question is, what makes a blower tank different? As I've already said, you are selecting leaders per detachment. So initially it's saying you add a lieutenant. So you go over to the leaders section and you find lieutenant here, and it has under it LV6, which means leadership value 6, and it has LPs is 2d6 plus 6, and that describes the leadership points that this lieutenant can generate. So what's happening here is that this leader that you can purchase for the 40 points is being assigned over to your command tank here. Now you may want to strip all of these individual units into stat cards, so you're not just having to work this all out on the fly from the actual force construction sheet once you're done. So how do you build a larger force going forwards? We'll stick with the pre-made detachments for now, and then we'll work everything in. So the idea of the way this flows is that you begin, as I've described before, picking one pre-made detachment and then adding a lieutenant. Then below we have the following text: treat this force as a single detachment during play. And then it goes on to say, build a bigger force with an additional detachment and add a captain at 80 points. So you're up to 2 detachments. Then add a 3rd detachment on the list above, of course, and add a major for 200 points. And then finally, and the maximum amount of detachments that can make a single force, you're adding a 4th detachment with a specialist major. So at this point, once you get up to 4 detachments in your force construction, you have to include a character leader, because you've now reached the size of a single force that in the setting was to be so big that a major character will be leading from the front on this whole entire force. And so here it says you can choose between all 3 of the specialist majors. And the specialist majors are here. You have Colonel Hammer and then 2 of the named majors below as an option. So what is this actually saying and not saying in conjunction with the rules? You may think this is saying that as you're adding detachments, you're treating everything in the game mechanics as one detachment. That's not actually what was intended. So if I refer you now to the Hammer Slammers, the Digital Crucible, on page 8, which immediately describes the dicing for sequence in which detachments move, there is a section highlighted in pink that describes how you operate when you have more than one detachment, and it's known as optional rule separate detachments. Now this optional rule becomes mandatory when you're not playing a scenario. So in simple terms, when you're playing a typical game of Hammer Slammers, unless you've invented your own scenario or you're going by a pre-made scenario sheet, which is probably not most of the time, you're probably just playing games as you go, so playing a generic game not to a special scenario, you are actually producing individual detachments with leaders. They aren't combined for being treated in the game as one entity. What they're actually saying here is that your 8 TUs always equate to one detachment. They don't split off into multiple detachments. And additionally, it's saying that your overall force can be between 1 and 4 detachments. And once it gets to 4 detachments, it's considered a single force. Now, this single force could be expanded, but the moment you expand it, you are then joining together with another entirely separate force. So either that's suitable for a multiplayer game, or you're actually splitting them up as far as how you're referencing them on the table from a lore point of view. So it's like 2 entire forces meeting together to fight another force or more. Now, as you grow the amount of detachments in your force, starting from 1, you'll notice we started at a lieutenant at 40 points, but as you get to the text below and you get to 2 detachments and so on, you'll see that it says and add a captain and add a major and so on. These aren't to be treated as optional purchases, because what they're actually describing is that as with the final and 4th detachment, as you're building in size, higher ranking leaders come into play because of the amount of military assets that are building up your force. Additionally, as you have greater leaders, you're also building up more of an effective fighting force. So as you're building your force larger and larger, it's representing a more major military operation for your faction of choice. Now, coming to the very bottom here, it will say up to 4 additional SGTSs, meaning sergeants, may be purchased at 20 points each. So this might seem really odd because it's lower ranking than the lieutenant that was being mentioned to be purchased for 40 points once you choose an initial detachment. So you can always purchase a lieutenant. So why is it now talking, once we've gone even past building the size of the force up larger and larger, about sergeants? The reason why is that these are known as insurance sergeants. So in the game, when you lose your leader that's assigned to a command within the actual detachments that make up your force. So for instance, if you have one detachment that was the tank detachment and you lost the command tank during the game, the leader would go. So what replaces that leader? Well, an ad hoc leader, and you choose randomly one of the other tactical units. So in this case, it would be one of the other remaining out of the 7 blower tanks. Now, if you have 4 additional sergeants and you're purchasing a mandatory lieutenant, you can purchase one of these sergeants and add it to the detachment. And you can only add one of these sergeants per detachment. Now, when you add this sergeant and your command tank is destroyed, when you select the backup leader, and it can be any of the remaining forces, the sergeant for 20 points gives you a type of insurance. And what it means is that the leadership value of your actual commander doesn't drop. It remains the same rank until the replacement leader is also destroyed, and then you start reducing your leadership value, so your fighting effectiveness of that detachment. So that's what these additional sergeants are doing, and why they're at the very bottom, because they're a type of insurance policy that you're thinking about once you're building up your force of 1 to 4 detachments with the ever increasing veterancy of leaders. So now that all sounds well and good, but what about if we want to play custom games, because I don't want to just stick to what's here? So you move over to the points cost section, and it has a tactical unit breakdown and also any extras. In this case, the extras are leaders, and the individual points are here for you to be able to make your own detachments. But still, even if you're making a custom detachment or a custom force of detachments, you should be using the guidelines from the detachment section over here. So again, when you're making your custom detachment, you don't break the 8 tactical unit limit. You build up your leaders as per the same way. And you also go up to a maximum of 4 detachments for a single force. I'm going to move on now to a couple of more complex detachment force sheets, and we can just have a little look at them and see some further information and start talking through how to get to grips with what you're looking at, so that you can pick the force you'd actually like beyond just looking at the points cost. So I'm moving over now to quite a late period, very elite and powerful mercenary unit known as the Aldai Legion. And see here, it's post 347 at the top. Now this is your timeline that you have to think about, very much like if you were playing historical wargaming. So typically, if you've played something like World War II, unless you get down into specific dates, you'll be thinking about, is it early war, mid-war, late war? With a similar kind of idea, you're looking to be post 347 as your date for when you bring in this force. Now, to be honest, the points costs of forces are actually not considered suitable for tournament play alone as a guarantee. So the custom detachments and even the pre-made detachments need to be experimented with, either just playing with your friends first or maybe playing mini tournaments, and perhaps keeping rankings of the various forces so that you can either give forces you consider weaker points reduction or a percentage tax on powerful forces, or maybe even looking towards the defensive advantages you could give forces that don't seem to be as effective for the same points on the tabletop. So you could actually construct a force that equates to the same points as another, and it's clearly not as fighting effective once you've played several games and really felt the difference between the forces. You could, for instance, for no points, give one of the forces some more buildings, despite whether they're attacking or defending, for them to hunker down into that are fortified, or you could give them minefields or drone swarms or something outside the ordinary. But I'm just leaving that as advice. But the main point is, when it comes to force construction, you are playing to points, but you can't guarantee them as a balanced formula that is going to work for a tournament. They'll only go up to casual play in the balancing of all these various factions. So timeline helps with that, because if you have something of a lesser timeline, even if the points are somewhat similar, and to be honest, a lot of these elite forces are generally a little bit more expensive, but if the points costs are too close, you're going to find the stuff that's further in the future is going to have some special rules and neat tricks that might just make things very awkward for things outside of the timeline. But it won't stop the units from being fighting effective It just is a more subtler balance than that becomes apparent. So here we have yet again another force that's made up of elite detachments. The difference is that you've got multiple options going on that I'm going to talk through, and you've got a lot more to take in. So as I've said before, you start by immediately going to the detachment section of the force, and you look at it and it tells you the TU limit, but it also is specified in this particular force that all infantry TUs start the game in APCs. So even if you make a custom detachment, all infantry TUs need to start the game in APC. So you're looking to always balance APC purchasing with whatever you construct. So looking down at the heavy armor detachment here, you can take a command tank, and you can take 2 tank destroyers here, and then 3 main battle tanks of either type. And then at the bottom you have a difference in points depending upon your choice. So this brings you to variance. So if I look here at the main battle tank and the tank destroyer options that it was referencing, you can see there's 3 options on one part of the sheet. So by default, everything is as is, but when you get to variants, you get the tank destroyer in the blue text, you get the command tank, and then you also get the alternative MBT. So you're seeing here same stats, but the movement is different. So normally the tank was fast, the movement is now medium. It's still light hover, but the armament has changed. These are the stats for the guns, and you can find these on the master gun sheet, so you can look these up and compare. And additionally, you'll see these triangles for each profile, and they will show you what the anti-artillery and anti-ATGW defense ratings are. So I'll give you one example here. If you choose the Laminate MBT, you can actually choose weapons, but your choice can either be an ECAP or a heavy laser. So far the differences I've talked about are just that there are more variants on a single sheet. So that's all I'm really saying. So in particular for this force, where you're not necessarily familiar with all the different vehicles and their silhouettes, I would be looking to get individual cards with the variants that you've selected so you don't get into a muddle. But going back once again to the detachments section, I'm going to reiterate the differences and how this particular force is constructed, and then I'll go through to the end showing the differences compared to the Hammers Slammers example I gave before, and you'll see how you always can use the detachment section as your overall guide. So going back to the fact that you're going to start with at least one detachment, and it's 8 TUs, and there are more sub choices within each individual detachment here if you still want to be matching the law or setting to exactness. You'll always be adding a lieutenant in for your first detachment at the cost of 80 points there. Once we get down now to the next part, we're going to see some differences to last time's example. So again, we see that same wording about treat this force whatever option is selected as a single detachment, which is referring to the options above. But when we're building a bigger force, we are only building a force that's made up of 2 detachments. So whatever option is selected as a single detachment, build a bigger force with both detachments and a captain. So we're now going to 2 detachments in size. All detachments points costs include 600 points of elite skills, which is built in, and it references supplement 5. What's handy about this particular force list is that all it's saying is that the skills themselves baked into these forces. You don't have to worry. Even when you go into your custom units for the individual points costs for the tactical units, all the skills are just taken where they're referenced on the stat sheets for the variants. So that's the first thing to think about. Then when you have a second detachment to make the full size force, or full size single force, you can add a captain in at 120 points. If you want, you can substitute the captain out for a major, or you can go for Colonel Dark, again a special character. I'm now going to go through how the elite skills fall into play in this particular detachment, and also taking Colonel Cornelius Dark. So if we go up to the top here, we have Colonel Cornelius Dark. So if you decide to purchase Colonel Cornelius Dark, when we get into the 2 detachment size force, you're looking at a large 520 points to then assign to your command unit of choice among the 2 detachments. And Colonel Dark comes with elite skills, and they are Inspirational Leader, which add +2 leadership value, and it's already included, which is great, so you don't have to think about it in this particular attachment. So you see a massive leadership 16. Now, the leadership value is not always included in all the detachments. If I go back to the original example, we look at Colonel Hammer here, you have a leadership of 12. You can see we've got elite skills, morale, officer, tactical genius, and command materials. Now, all of these elite skills are to be added to Colonel Hammer, but because it doesn't say that any of their stats are included, it means you have to look them up on the elite skills sheet, and then you could go down and look for, so for instance, the moral officer, tactical genius, command material. So we go into tactical genius, we're making leadership roll to determine blah 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 2d6. So inspirational leader, if he had that, you'd be having to add 2 to the leadership value, even though it wouldn't be present and combined at the top. So that's the example. You're always adding the special, stacking the special skills if they're not been added to the overall stat already, in which this case they haven't been. So going back to our example, so here, as we said, we've got the elite skills, Inspirational Leader, +2 leadership values are already there. The command material, it's now referencing what command material is, rolling 3 dice for leadership value, and then pick the best 2 results. So it's pre-baked into that, so you know up front why you're purchasing this 520 point leader. So when we look at the elite skills, we find them all listed down in their own section. So anywhere where these elite skills would come into play for the units that you select, you always follow the special rules as here, and you don't pay extra for them. And I'm going to give you one example. One of the tank options in the heavy armor detachment, a MBT, and then it would have a heavy laser. Now, because it has a heavy laser, it can use the laser burn through. And the laser burn through is shown here. You have a results table and you have the stats. So you know when you're buying this heavy laser, you're not just getting a heavy laser on the tank that's got 2 shots and firepower, 4 for infantry, 5 for vehicles and the anti-tank stats. You're additionally getting the ability to use that laser in the laser burn through mode with the elite skill. That is just baked in for the points cost. So this is how this particular force construction is working here. If you go over to the points cost and the breakdown here, you'll also see we had a reference to supplement 5. So in your infantry options that you see up here, you can typically have standard infantry, which are armored. You can get variants, which is a support variant, or tank hunters, and it changes certain weapons. It's swapping out certain weapons. But if you start getting into your custom built detachments, which follow the structure here, you can actually take a standard infantry, and that's only 1, and you can swap them for a sniper at 70 points or an enhanced sniper for 290 points. And as you can see in the brackets, it says S5. Now that blue S5 is using the blue text, so it's referencing a variant rule again, and a special rule. And the S5 is also standing for supplement 5. So you're having this massive points jump on a particular infantry that you wish to swap out. So you go, well, no, instead of an infantry, I'm going to take a sniper. And I'm going to take that sniper and I'm going to have the unit now cost 70 points. Having thought about it, no, I've got a lot of very powerful anti-tank weapons. I've got maybe some artillery in another force. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I want to go further than the sniper because I've got the option. I want to take an elite sniper. It's 290 points. Well, that's a very large investment there for a single infantry stand. If you think about that points cost compared to even the sniper at 70, it's noticeably larger. So what you do, if you feel like you want to check what you're purchasing, you go back to the updates page like so, and then you're looking to go into the updates and the play sheets and all this area here, and you're looking for the supplement 5. So if you go to your supplement 5, which is just here, like so, you can go all the way down until you find elite skill enhanced sniper. So that 200 and odd points unit will follow all of these rules in addition to being a sniper, so that you can exactly see what you're purchasing, and you can get your single card or print this sheet out. So every time you have your base with the sniper character on it, you've got it ready to use to go along with what you've constructed. So now we're going to go to a final example, and then we'll look at some models and how they might fit in at the end. So the final example is now showing the sheer breadth and depth that you can go to with force options. So it's not necessarily more complex than this example here. Moving on from this very elite skills heavy option here to something that's now just got a lot of possibilities and something that can actually be a much larger force. So we're going to get into an entire force that we know as the new Ukrainian army. Now the new Ukrainian army has 3 distinct force sheets. We have the planetary defense, which I'm going to base this example on. We also have the new Ukrainian army based on the Zaporozhye regiment, which will remember that name because that's going to come in handy for something a bit later on in the description. And then finally, we have new Ukrainian army. So these are all basically like neo-Soviet themed, way out of history, far future, Slav or Eurasian bloc with a bit of a neo-Soviet theme to the look and feel of them, with mercenary units. So it's more a planetary federal force. So we've got this final force here, that's the Cossack airborne. So these 3 are completely separate starting points. So they are, I'm just mentioning them because within the overall force, you could reuse models potentially between some of them, but they are completely different starting points. So, like I said, I'm going to go for the new Ukrainian army planetary defense. And here we have similar looking, I'm just going to zoom in. We have similar looking profile sheets, but as you can see, they stretch out to 2 pages here and there's a bit more going on. So what you first find is that we have elite rank and veteran rank. So what does that mean? So when you're going down to your detachment section, you're either picking detachments and choosing whether you're going for an elite variant or a veteran variant. So if you're going for a elite variant, you're looking to make up a detachment or select a detachment that goes up to 8 tactical units. But if you're going veteran, that will then become 10 tactical units per detachment. The force can build up to a bigger force, and that bigger force can then have some interesting branches going on. So once you have all your various selections and you end up with bigger options if you go veteran over elite, but their stats, and this is why they're separated in blue and red, change. So for instance, you've got the elite with the 3+ versus the veteran with the 4+, which is all of your target rolling for a unit. So it makes each unit less effective at doing what it needs to try and do, but at the same time you can have more of them, essentially, is what's going on here. Now this is some of what's making things unique. When we get down to building a larger force of more than one detachment, it starts this very similar to the examples we had before. We start adding captains with various points differences depending on elite or veteran, and we get up to a 3rd detachment, and we start getting up to majors, and then alternatively you're adding another detachment or a 4th detachment, and this is where it becomes divergent. Once we hit this 4th detachment, it can be from either of the Zaporozhye brigade sheets. So it's now referencing a completely different sheet to the new Ukrainian Army Planetary Defense Force. And when it's saying either, it basically means any at this point, because there's now 3 sheets that you could particularly choose. It's just at the time of when this was created, there was only 2, so it's not naming which ones they are, it's just saying either. We also find we have a special character that appears in the additional sheets. So we have our major, captain, lieutenant, sergeant. We've also got the colonel down here with his 400 points limit, but he also exists in the 4th potential sheet that you can choose to extend your force out. So you can either build it up to 4 detachments from this sheet, or for your 4th detachment, you can go into the mercenary forces that actually formed this planetary-wide army and really started it going. And you can see, just as a little marker here, because it has the logos all the time on the force construction, or national Ukrainian flag, you see a red star looking symbol with this yellow triangle, because it's a state that's derived from a mercenary logo. So that's just to give you an idea. So that's why this construction is this way. And so we go over to now 3 different mercenary brigades, and you can see the star, and it's got a Z in the middle, but it's removed the golden triangle. This is the original logo for the mercenary unit. And we see we have a description here. So we have the strike and heavy, and we have the reconnaissance and engineers. And then if we come over here, we have a new sheet 3, which is experimental. So your final detachment can be one of these, and they will follow the force construction rules within this sheet, not the original, and all of the points cost and everything will be here. And as I said, at that point, you can take the special character still from this sheet, or you can take them from your original Ukrainian Planetary Defense Force you've got here, or I should say new Ukrainian Planetary Defense Force. So you can also look to see that you can choose flyers with variants and infantry, and you've got artillery options going on here. You've got a few elite skills that are mentioned here. Now, if we go across and look down, we also have towed weapons. So we have a lot of various different forces and different tactical unit options. So you have to work your way through them. But it shouldn't be that arduous of a force to construct. It's just that there's a lot of options that you can choose. Now, if we go down and look for the fine print again in the detachment section, we have our 8 and 10. We have our ability to choose the 4th detachment as one from another force sheet, as we've already seen from the original mercenaries that formed this planetary force. And then it says all units should field an insurance sergeant, though it's not required. So this is now advisory. We talked about the insurance sergeants before. It's now saying that by taking them, you're keeping closer to the lore, because they obviously are talking about much larger forces. For this background, you've gone way beyond a mercenary group to a massive planet-wide army with huge numbers in its ranks. And then we have multiple points cost styles for jeeps it's talking about, in 2 command styles. And you'll notice that it hasn't actually referenced that any kind of elite skill is being baked into the forces. So there's not, like last time, 600 points worth of elite skills that are baked into the force. So what that then means is that you have to read each sheet and try and work out how skills may fall into play. So let's have a look. We have anti-artillery and anti-tank guided weapon capabilities. It says the vehicles may network their blue triangle 1 quality rolls. So under the elite skills, what that's saying is there's not baked in points costs that it's explicitly saying, but if you do see a blue triangle 1, it means it can use the networking rule. So you see it here with the Rosa 2, you've got a networking 1 there, and you see it dotted around here and all the way around here. But if we go and we was to start getting into our optional forces, we also see the blue ones in the triangles. We don't see the red ones in the triangles. And let me just get you back to the hammer slammers. We see red ones in triangles. We don't see any elite skills relating. So without that, these aren't networking. They would have to have a purchasable skill that could actually allow them to network those defense firing options. Now that might come in the form of elite skill tables that you can roll on as you play your games in series in a campaign. You can keep a track of that. Once you've built your force, you can add additional skills to stand out tactical units on dice rolls on tables. I hope that's helped. I wasn't focusing on the rule system. We're really focusing here on building of the force. So it's keeping in mind, looking at your variance options, always looking at your detachments for how you construct your forces, and then diving into points costs and diving into leader options to really fine tune how you want your force to look. Because at the end of the day, this has never been a game that's lent towards tournaments, big open play, and really having the flexibility to play as you want to within the setting and play large and small games. So it's about scaling and open play, really. You can see it from the force construction design that's the primary goal. But we've got these guiding rails for lore specific and a starting point to start working out maybe tournament forces or individual detachments for tournaments, if you then start potentially ranking or making power orders of the various detachments. So I'm going to finish off going over to the brigade models over here, and we're going to choose the 6mm range, because that's my preferred range to play all these games with. And we're going to go over to the Slammers Regiment. I'm going to start looking at the various miniatures and working them out in cross-referencing this Hammer Slammers force construction sheet here on the right. So I'm just going to stop talking about the makeup of the forces and how to build them, and just match the stats profiles to the miniatures and start talking about what pricing might look like from a monetary point of value compared to the points costs and what you're looking to make. So if we start from the top left, we've got infantry squads here. So the infantries have variants. They can be on skimmers. You can have a white mice unit. You can have grenade launcher plus 2cm power gun with that, and a tank hunters unit. So we look through the Slammers Regiment, section, and we look through and we go, okay, there's no infantry on their own. But I see there's an army pack here and it's got an image of infantry, and I also see down below there's an infantry detachment. So this should help us out, I would expect. So we go into the infantry detachment, and this would be against the 6mm cards, so they might not always match up to the 15mm in exact quantities of units when you look at some of this construction here. But at £4.50 we find, okay, we're using 4 jeeps, so no, that's not us. But we also got 12 ground 0 game skimmers. So we go over and we got a variant on skimmers, as we can see just here. So you know that you want the ground 0 game skimmers. You can find them on the site separately, and you'll find that they're coming in decent packs. Now you can use typically 4 on a base, but I've got away with just putting 2 skimmers on a base. I think it looks just fine, and I use the same base size for 6mm as infantry, but it is specified specifically in the rule book of how many skimmers you'll use on a base and how many infantry on foot you'll use on a base. So then if I just go back and then look at regular infantry, we can see that the infantry that represent the Hammer Slammers infantry are the ground 0 games NAC infantry, and you're getting 24 in a pack. So the skimmers, you're getting 12 in a pack, and with the ground 0 games infantry, you're getting 24 in a pack. So it's going to be quite easy to be able to pick those up, and they'll be low cost. And they are just individually searchable on the site, and you can go in under the generic 6mm science fiction section and actually pick those up. Or you can go direct to Ground Zero Games and buy them, but here they've got the exact code matching to what's been picked out as a stylistic choice for the Hammer Slammers. So it's best to buy them through here to make sure you've got the right ones. So now moving on to the right, we've got the M2A1 to 4 blower tanks as options, and we've also got the M2-4F, which is the command tank option. So we scroll down and we find we've got the M2A1, so we could either use this model here, or we could use the M2A4 as our regular tank, and then we have the M2A4 command. So as you can see, a single tank on its own is £1.75, and it's the same for the command tank. So when you're looking at a detachment of 8, if you buy 7 of the blower tanks and you buy 1 of the command tanks here, you would actually have a detachment that you could put out on the table and play. Then moving down to the combat car, and we have the command car variant as well. So we look down and we find the combat car, and then we find also the command car, and you can see again M9A1 up to 3 combat car. So we've got the A1 combat car just here, that will do. And we have the command car. So those are only £1 a model. So if you're looking over at some of these attachments here, so we could have a combat car detachment. Again, you could do it similar to the tanks. You could just go for a very plain individual detachment and have eight of the cars. So you'd have 7 combat cars and 1 command car. So at that, you've got £8, and there you are. You have a detachment that's technically, or not advisable, a legal force to be playing with. You could actually field a force of just combat cars, which would be very fun for some infantry fights and maybe against some of the aliens. But if someone else is taking tanks, you very much be at a disadvantage, but you could still potentially outmaneuver them, and with the sheer volume of fire bring them down from rear armor or side armor. You get a lot of volume of shots there, so I'm just giving you a bit of orientation to finish up. And then finally the Jeeps, and you have the various Jeep variants, the mortar Jeeps, and then you've got the older version of the combat car that was used. So we look there and we look for the Jeeps, and we've got the regular Jeep here, and we've got the mortar Jeep, and those are all 50p a model, so you can absolutely stuff some of your attachments with these without breaking the bank. And just probably want to base those ones because they're quite small, quite fiddly. So yeah, just get a little acrylic base, typical that you'd use with micro armor, base them up, and you can mix them in with some of your detachments. And we've got here an example: one mortar Jeep, one tri-barrel Jeep, 6 TUs of infantry on skimmers. So yeah, you only need a couple of Jeeps in that one. For the single mobile infantry detachment, probably as an example here of this basic iconic force that's you can pretty much use in most of the timeline. If you were going for the poster boy, then I would suggest the single armor detachment up here. The very first entry is a really good balance, where you've just got the 5 combat cars, got 1 command combat car, and then you got 2 blower tanks in reserve, and that's a good balanced force. That's quite good going. You got plenty of firepower, maneuver, and you got a little bit of staying power with the tanks, especially if you're playing within exact timeline, because your tanks are pretty much some of the best out there at that point. So there's a kind of comparison to the miniatures. As I said, if you look at some of the pre-arranged detachments, then you'll find that they're matching the 6mm cards. So sometimes there's a little bit of modification required. But if you're going into customs attachments and you don't want to think about it, using this tutorial, you could just, for instance, go into the army pack, simply look to see what it's got there, and go, okay, I'll just build these in blocks of 8 tactical units to create my own detachments. So with your infantry, you've got 24 there, they'll have mixed armor, so you'll be setting those into groups of 4 and basing them. The skimmers, again, likewise, it's down to you. And then you might want to get some bases for the Jeeps and combat cars. And then as for the tanks here, you've got 8 here. You can also see that you've got two command tank variants. You can split them down even further and have your commanders in tanks, which is a very nice thing. I'm a big fan of putting your leaders into the command tanks rather than the lighter vehicles, just for a bit of stopping power. When it comes to keeping those things alive and keeping their leadership points flowing. So hopefully that's been a good tutorial for force construction. In the next video, which will finish the full introduction to Hammer Slammers, and we'll move into the battle reports and have some fun with games, will be a tutorial for actual playthrough of the basic rules. So I'll have some various units and show how the various phases go together, and we'll see some of the terrain and some of the special rules as well on top of that once we build up from a foundation. So until then, see you all later, and hopefully you can get playing the game.